14 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I looked at off the wire this week. The first kicker, Chase McLaughlin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. McLaughlin, for the majority of the season, he's been a solid kicker out there in 61% of fantasy leagues. In Week 13, he was clutching that one, a game-time field goal, 55 yards, and then a game-winning field goal in overtime for this Tampa Bay Buc team. So the last few weeks, Week 10 versus San Francisco, 8. Week 12 at the Giants, 4. And Week 13 at Carolina, 16 fantasy points. So this week coming up, great matchup versus the Raiders. Give up the most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And he just has a big boot as Chase McLaughlin. And this Tampa Bay Buc team, they're putting up points once again. With Mike Evans back in the lineup and now winning 2 in a row. Trying to go for 3 in a row. And McLaughlin's been a big part of it. So if you need a kicker with 6 teams on bye, and McLaughlin all season long showing the distance boot, he's definitely an ad off the wire this week. The next kicker, Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks. So Jason Myers, he's been a solid kicker all season long and one of the better kickers in the league on a high-powered offense. Anytime you're on a high-powered offense, the opportunities are going to be there. And this week coming up, a good matchup at the Cardinals, especially indoors. Give up the 13th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. We missed an extra point last week versus the New York Jets, but still a kicker I could trust and still a kicker I think that can help fantasy owners down the stretch. Week 11 at the Niners, 12. Week 12 versus Arizona, 4. And Week 13 at the Jets, 9 fantasy points. So this week in an indoor game at Arizona, in a ball game where these two teams know each other very well, and it might come down to some field goals, I think Myers could go out there once again, have a decent performance. Next kicker, Brandon McManus of the Green Bay Packers. So Brandon McManus, he's been a solid signing for this Packer team over the last month of the season, and he's gone out there with 3 double-digit fantasy games in the last 5 weeks. Here's McManus. Week 8 at Jacksonville, 12. Week 9 versus the Lions, 5. Week 11 at Chicago, 2. Week 12 versus the Niners, 10. And Week 13 versus Miami, 13. So when you're in a high-powered offense, obviously your opportunities are going to be there week in and week out. And Week 14, a potential high-scoring ball game at division rival Detroit Lions. It's a Thursday night game as well, where we know the scores are always high-scoring for the most part. And both these offenses could put points on the board early and often. So this week here, opportunities will be there for Brandon McManus. It's an indoor game, and I expect high scoring between these two teams. Definitely a kicker to add off the wire. And we've seen all those years in Denver, how many 50-plus yarders he's hit as well with those Denver Broncos. So right now, well, he's out there in 87% of fantasy leagues. I like him as an ad this week. Next kicker, John Parker Romo of the Minnesota Vikings. Parker Romo out there in 88% of fantasy leagues. And he's kicking the football well since he's filled in for Will Renchard. So all season long, this Minnesota Viking team, they've been stalling out in the red zone. And Parker Romo, 3 out of 4 games, double-digit fantasy points so far. So Week 10 at Jacksonville, 12. Week 11 at Tennessee, 4 fantasy points. Week 12 at the Bears, 11. And Week 13, a good ball game versus the Arizona Cardinals. So Week 14, a great matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons that give up the second most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And Parker Romo, he's getting 3 or 4 opportunities weekly for this Viking team. Like I said, they stall out a lot in the red zone. But Parker Romo, he's hit some big field goals so far this season for this Minnesota Viking team. And this week with a good matchup coming to town, Atlanta. Like I said, the defense don't really stop anyone, and kickers have had field days versus them this year. I think he could go out there once again and help fantasy owners, and he's out there in 88% of fantasy league. And the final kick I will tear off the wire is Chad Ryland of the Arizona Cardinals. Ryland, he's been a solid kicker filling in for Matt Prater this season for this Cardinal team, and he's made the most of his opportunity. I know last season was a struggle for him, no doubt about it, with the New England Patriots, and they cut him loose, missing a lot of field goals and even some extra points at times as well. But with this Arizona Cardinal team and playing, obviously, his home games indoors is a huge plus for Ryland as well. Week 9 versus the Bears, 10. Week 10 versus the Jets, 7. Week 12 at Seattle, 5. And Week 13 at the Minnesota Vikings, 15 fantasy points. So he's going out there. He's putting points on the board as Ryland. This offense stalls out a lot as well in the red zone. And this week in the matchup versus Seahawks, where it's an indoor game in Arizona, and I think more points will be put on the board compared to their Week 12 matchup where they lost 16-6 is this Cardinal team. I think Ryland once again could go out there in deeper leagues and help fantasy owners. And he's had double-digit fantasy games, 3 out of the last 5 games. So that's a few kickers I looked at off the wire for Week 14 of the fantasy football season.